Hey, U.S. history students, wanted to take a minute and talk specifically about the civil rights movement and education, which is fitting, right, since we're talking about it in school. So we're going to talk about a court case that we looked at a couple times from the late 1800s and then how that got changed in the 1950s in Brown v. Board of Education in this video. And then we'll do one other video on a group called the Little Rock Nine. And I'll have a couple of links in the comments or in the description section for you to take a peek at. So just a reminder to hit this court case one more time, right? In the late 1800s, the U.S. Supreme Court decides a case called Plessy v. Ferguson and created a system of separate but equal. And we had talked about before we left that the separate part Southern schools got, right? Like they would make sure blacks and whites were separate. Were they ever equal? Not even close. So even though separate but equal was the law of the land from 1897 to 1954, they were never actually equal, right? Even though they were separate, they were never equal. Now, Brown v. Board is going to take a look at this phrase even and kind of pick it apart. And they're going to come to the conclusion, this Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court, that the mere fact of separating kids based on race is unequal, right? Creates inequality. When you separate, you're saying, whether you mean to or not, and they meant to, one group is better than another, and therefore one group is worse than another. Okay, and so that all-important court case from the 1950s, and one of the most important Supreme Court cases decisions probably ever, is Brown versus Board of Education, which gets rid of Plessy v. Ferguson, right? It cancels it out. They said, no, in the 1800s, they got that wrong. Separate but equal is inherently unequal, right? You cannot split kids up based on race. Now, this then is going to force integration in schools in the South, right, where most of this segregation had been taking place. And do you think Southern schools overnight are just going to open arms to integration? No, right? This is going to be a fight in a lot of regards. It's going to take the national government and the president and the actual military getting involved to integrate some of these areas, which we'll talk about in the next video. One other thing, and I think I have a clip on it here. I'll have a clip in the bottom. But the case actually uses, one of the lawyers uses a Doll test, and I'll link that test and kind of a similar test that's more modern in the description section. But the Doll test, it would take little African-American kids, right, school-age elementary kids. They would have a black doll and a white doll on a desk in front of these students, and they would ask them questions like, which doll's the nice doll, right? And then the African-American kid would pick which doll's the good doll, the bad doll. And overwhelmingly, African-American kids would pick the white doll as the good doll, right? The black doll is the bad doll, et cetera, et cetera. All the negative questions, they would usually percentage-wise funnel towards the dolls that look like them, the African-American dolls. The good dolls were the white dolls. And it's like, well, why would they say that, or where would they see that? Well, they saw it every day, right? During Jim Crow laws, during going to the bad school compared to the nice white school down the road. And if you look, at some of these pictures I had, right, this was pretty typical for an African-American school that you see in these images, and the white schools didn't look like one-room schoolhouses. And so Brown v. Board, super important case, but it is the case that changes or outlaws school segregation, right? In a case that will require some fighting over in terms of actually forcing schools to integrate and allow black kids in. So we'll talk more next time about this group called the Little Rock Nine, which deals with, like it sounds, 9 African-American students are going to integrate a high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. So don't forget, Brown v. Board integrates, desegregates schools. See you next time.